Dr. Gary Chapman is author of #1 New York Times bestseller, Five Love Languages. I'm sure you read it. And I want to tell you a few more things about him that you might not know. He is Senior Associate Pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He's Director of Marriage and Family Life Consultants. For 35 years, he's been counseling couples. I think many of them, Dr. Chapman, have found marriage was more than they anticipated.
Well, I think most of us discover that marriage is more than we anticipated.
How many years have you been married?
51.
50.
Married when I was 9 years old.
Oh, of course. And I want to count your grandchildren.
We have 2 grandchildren, a little girl, 14, and a grandson, 12.
I see you with a picture of him here, and I'm sure you're enjoying this season very much.
Yep, we are enjoying our grandchildren.
You've brought us so much practical wisdom about relationships, and especially marriage, but this is too fun. Things I wish I'd known before we got married. Now, is that the royal we, or is that you?
That's me. You know, for a long time, I have wanted to write a book to singles. Now, a lot of married couples are reading this book, but I really wrote it for singles, to say, here are things that I know now that had I known before we got married would have made our marriage much easier. Because my wife and I had a lot of struggles in the early years of our marriage. So what I'm trying to do is to help young people get ready. You know, the reality is we spend more time preparing for our vocation than we do preparing for marriage. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's why we're more successful in our vocation than we are in our marriages. So I'm just trying to give some practical help in saying to singles, here's some things you need to learn before you get married. And I'm hoping it's going to help them have less conflicts and struggles than we had in our marriage.
And, you know, we know it's a 50% divorce rate. You point out it's usually within the first 7 years.
Yeah.
So these bumps in the road can really be derailing.
Yeah, I think people often give up before they really get started. But I believe, and one of the things I'm saying in this book is, the time to prepare for marriage is not after you get engaged. That's what we're doing mainly in the churches. We take people when they get engaged, and then we do premarital counseling.
They already have their plan.
And they've already got it all mapped out. You know,
and their date.
And they don't need it. It's going to be wonderful, they think. The time to start, I speak on a lot of college campuses, and I say the time to start preparing for marriage is now. Maybe you're a freshman, maybe you're not even dating, but you need to be getting ready. If you ever hope to get married, here's some things you need to learn. And you can learn a lot of these things even before you're dating. So I'm hoping that we'll start moving down the road and helping people prepare for marriage long before they get engaged.
In love, we should all understand, is not an adequate foundation. I didn't know romantic love had 2 stages.
I didn't either.
Until I read your book.
You know, I think most people enter marriage, they're in love. You know, my wife and I were in love. I mean, it's wonderful. It's euphoric. You know, they're just the most wonderful person you've ever met in your life. And it's going to be wonderful. You know it's going to be wonderful. You love each other. Everything's wonderful. It's been so easy. And you think it's going to be that way forever. What I didn't know is that the average lifespan of the obsession is 2 years.
Oh,
and
yeah.
my wife and I had been dating for 2 years before we got married. So we came down off the high rather soon after the honeymoon, and I was disillusioned because nobody told me that. Nobody told me that I would come down off the high and I would begin to see things in her I didn't like, because I didn't see those before. And she saw things in me she didn't like. I wasn't prepared for that. And I'm trying to say to young people, look, this is temporary. It's wonderful to be in love.
It's God's design.
That's right, it's right. But there are 2 stages. That stage is easy. You're pushed along with the emotions. But once you come down, you have to move into the 2nd stage of love, which is much more intentional and requires much more effort.
I'm impressed that you kept the word romantic in there, though.
Yeah. Well, because I think it's important. You know, I think we can have a romantic relationship. Romance has to do with warm emotions toward each other, excitement about each other, and we can keep that alive. But we have to learn to speak each other's love language. And in that chapter, I give a brief recap of the 5 love language concept, which is that we all have a different love language.
And typically, a couple represents two different sets.
That's right. My language, for example, is words of affirmation. If my wife will tell me good things about me, I'm a happy man. Her language, on the other hand, is acts of service. If I help her, if I do the dishes, if I vacuum the floors, if I take out the trash.
Could I quote you? If I had known that taking out the garbage was sexy for my wife, I would have been taking out the garbage twice a day. When did you make this discovery?
You know, it was a long ways into our marriage before we discovered this concept for ourselves, that what makes one person feel loved doesn't make another person feel loved. And when we get married, we come down off the high, we still love each other, and we're expressing love, but we're typically speaking our own language. So for me, I gave my wife words of affirmation. I told her how nice she looked. I told her how much I appreciated what she did. I probably told her a dozen times a day, I love you, honey. I love you, honey. But after a while, because I wasn't helping her around the house,
they were just words.
Just words, you know, and she said to me, you know, you keep saying, I love you, I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? And I was blown out of the saddle, you know, because in my mind, I was loving her. In her mind, if I loved her, I'd be helping her. It was a huge, huge insight for us.
It points to the need to become a student of your spouse, which you always emphasize. Now, you don't just marry a wonderful partner, you marry a family.
Yeah.
Now, how many people own that before they move into life together?
I think most couples think we're going to be together. We're going to ride out in the West together. We're going to set a little house together. It's just going to be the two of us. And I say, I wish I'd known that I was marrying into a family. She has a mother and a daddy. She has brothers and sisters. She may have a stepmother and a stepfather. She has uncles and aunts. You're marrying into that family, and she is marrying into your family. That's why I say to couples, early on, if you think there's any chance you're going to get married, spend time with each other's families. Get to know what's there. Find out about her Uncle George that's always messing up every party they have, you know. Find out about this, because he's going to be there in your life. And so realize that you're marrying into a family, and you're going to have to relate to them. You can have a long-distance relationship with them. You can have a close relationship. It can be good, it can be bad, but you're going to have a relationship. And you ought to be thinking about that before you get married.
I love that you end the chapters, well, it's called Talking It Over.
Yeah.
Again, ideally for those contemplating marriage, even if you don't have a significant other, you talk about dating here.
Yeah.
If there is someone on the scene, you can start to process some of this stuff with the questions that you've provided. Another great tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a whole section at the back of the book on how to build a healthy dating relationship. You know, the purpose of dating is to get to know the other person. And many times we don't even explore areas of life. We don't explore, for example, the intellectual area. What kind of books do you read? You know, and let's read a book together. Let's discuss some ideas. And we don't discuss emotions. How well do you handle your anger? Or how well what do you do when you're really, really happy? You know, how do you process pain? Do you withdraw and want to suffer alone, or do you want to talk about it? So you know, asking questions about the intellectual, the emotional, the spiritual. You know, where does your heart lie? Even Christians are not all marching to the beat of the same drummer. You know, some are Sunday morning Christians, and some are daily devotional Christians. Huge difference between those two. So exploring the roots of the relationship, the spiritual and the social area. What do you like to do? You know, maybe he's into sports cars, you know, and the whole racing industry. And it makes no sense to you why anybody would watch cars running around in an oval, you know. Or what is she into? What does she like to do? And I don't mean you have to have all the same interests, but you have to be willing to enter into that, because you're going to be married. And so you have to say, okay, then, you know, you hear a lot about golf widows, for example, which means he's playing golf every Saturday and she feels like she's a widow. Well, you could have known that before you got married.
Yes.
And if that's not what you want, then you negotiate and work that out.
I'm not telling you something you don't know, Dr. Chapman. The moral compass has been demagnetized by moral relativism.
Yeah.
And some watching would feel that really the best way to make sure things are going to work out well is to live together first.
Yeah.
It seems to be being embraced even by Christians.
Yeah. Well, it seems logical. If we live together, we'll get some experience and we can find out if it works. But we've done research now for 20 years on people living together before they get married. The divorce rate is higher for couples who live together before they get married. Part of the reason is you cannot simulate marriage.
Interesting.
Marriage is a commitment. But when you live together, you both know you're not committed. I've heard couples say to each other, he said, well, now look, we're not married. Like, don't expect so much of me. We're not married. They know there's not a commitment there. And they know that any day, either one of them can walk out of the relationship. You can't simulate marriage. And so consequently, what seems to be logical, in reality, simply doesn't work.
If you break God's laws, they will break you.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much more, and I'm so thankful we have another segment, because these are such meaningful illustrations, and you've made so many of them fun, Dr. Chapman.
Thank you.
So, let me tell you, first of all, things I wish I'd known before we got married is at our e-store. And we'll have more on tomorrow's program.